Hey, Ivo. Uh, I'll start straight away. So, do you remember your first emotions when you first tried ChatGPT?
Yeah, I mean that's such a great question. I think the emotion that I felt and that a lot of people felt at that time was one of magic, right? Maybe it's become a little cliche, but it's the emotion that the human being feels in the face of a technology that is truly sophisticated, right? Um, there's a kind of an enchantment, and especially with something like this that's intelligent, that seems to be mimicking, right? And in fact, seems to be intelligent. You kind of get this wow effect, absolutely. Um, and I'm sure this was probably true for you as well. That wow effect is kind of followed by a moment of questioning and possibly terror, right? What does it mean for a synthetic mind to exist to this extent? And I think we're still, kind of grappling with that and trying to resolve our understanding of this moment in history.
Yeah, like it's interesting. You mentioned magic. I 100% agree with that. And like once I thought that probably like some like say Neanderthals would feel the same if they suddenly got, I don't know, mobile phone or something like that. It's like really something from, it came so sudden and so unexpected. Uh, there wasn't like most of the people outside of this industry, they didn't see the evolution actually of that, and suddenly you have like a, n- a mind on demand, which is like crazy.
Yeah, but that's not so rare, right? If you look at the history of technological revolutions, you have these moments of eruption, right? Where there's a big kind of leap in innovation, and it's not like those technologies were not around before. They were kind of marginal, right? They were marginal, and often they were even ridiculed, and that's certainly true for AI, right? I think before ChatGPT came out and we entered this moment. If you're an AI scientist, you didn't love telling people what you did because there were so many false starts and so many kind of failed, eruption stages. But now suddenly, the switch has flipped, and we are, like Neanderthals, being given, this piece of tech. It reminds me a little bit of 2001 Space Odyssey, right? The way it starts with the obelisk and the apes kind of gathering around, and all of a sudden, they are faced with a quantum leap in their own development. And all these, books that have been around, like the Singularity is near, the Ray Kurzweil book, suddenly become extremely relevant. Again, that was somewhat of a fringe movement for a long time, and now it appears prescient. In fact, I was rereading it recently, and it's incredible how accurate he is. He actually almost predicts it to the day. He says sometime in the 2020s, we're going to see an incredible leap in artificial intelligence, and that's going to bring us ever closer to this asymptotic point in human history when the advancement of our technology and our civilization will be almost infinitely steep.
Yeah, actually, a lot of stuff to discuss, but we'll get to that in a minute. So let's maybe introduce yourself and UB Capital, which you're a partner of. How do you guys like? What's your investment thesis related to AI and like everything AI related about UB Capital?
Sure, sure. So UB is a pretty general Web3 fund, crypto, early stage. We look at a range of categories. We're not necessarily tied to any one vertical. The principles in the original fund was around since 2017. At that time, a lot of layer one type investments, a lot of infrastructure, but always with a view to consumer, right, and mass adoption. And so at this point, kind of in Web3, it's an exciting orientation to have because we are beginning to see kind of glimmers of that. we're seeing some applications like Web3 social take off a little bit more. We're seeing some of this meme stuff happening, which you may or may not love, but there is a kind of consumer, arguably, or at least social component to that that is undeniable. And then from our perspective, Deepin, a category that's quite interesting as well, is somewhat in the consumer direction, kind of creating a new identity, a new type of internet person, the consumer producer, you might call that person, the operator. So I think we are inching closer to the consumer in Web3. And then, of course, AI, right, is very recent. And I think also kind of falls into that bucket. As far as the consumer side for AI, we're quite interested in agents. That seems to be kind of the application that most people are focused on at the moment. But in terms of AI thesis generally, I would say it's informed by quite a lot of caution, right? Um, we have potentially a combustible mix here. Crypto, not known for its restraint or its modest goals, probably better known for its hype, and let's face it, it's bullshit at times. And then now we have this revolutionary technology that promises a lot to a lot of people and to remake even the civilization itself. So from an investment perspective, I would say our AI thesis is a cautious one. There aren't a lot of ways to gain exposure to AI in the current economy. There are some publicly traded companies. They're extremely expensive. So, if you're looking for exposure, there aren't too many places to go. Crypto is very good at creating exposure because it's very good at just tokenizing pretty much everything and financializing pretty much everything. And so it's an easy way to gain exposure to these things. But as a long-term investor, as a VC investor, you don't want to be taking kind of a hedge fund approach and just writing narratives. You want to find the parts of that AI ecosystem that really work. And for us, it's really, I say, threefold. There's kind of the infrastructure side. GPUs are going to be needed, right, in the future. It's a pretty strong assumption to make. And so, given that there are not enough GPUs, the question is, can you use, particularly the coordinating mechanic, the coordinating property of crypto to supply more? And that's where, Deepin, GPU infrastructure networks come in. So we're very focused on that side. And so here, we're more interested in kind of high quality compute, like H100, top of the line GPUs, and coordinating those data centers in order to give that supply for training to top enterprises and others building the more sophisticated models. And then we extend that thesis a little bit to the future of AI and the idea that as Mark Andreessen said, we are currently in a mainframe era of AI. You might think of the mainframe era of computing, right? You have to go to a room somewhere in a university with a punch card and put in your computation. You actually come back the next day to see what the output was. It was highly centralized. It was highly permissioned. But then over time, we entered kind of a personal computing era. And so we believe that will likely happen as well. And that, you're going to want, localized AIs, privacy preserving AIs, more customized AIs, a long tail of different AIs, and you want those to be closer to the consumer. And there again, we think about, Deepin, and for those who don't know, obviously, Deepin is decentralized physical infrastructure devices that are closer to the end user. So they're low latency and they provide more safeguards and in a way decentralize, right? The current paradigm for AI. So I'd say those three verticals. There's kind of big GPU compute, more consumer Deepin resources and compute, and then AI agents running on crypto rails. They're able to do things, using what is for humans a very difficult Web3 interface currently.
Hmm. So yeah, Deepin is actually very interesting. Do you envision like let's stop for a minute for specifically Deepin as GPUs For example, I'm a company and I want to train my own model, like language model or some other AI model. So uh, right now, I need to basically go to either Amazon or Google or maybe some resellers and get the GPUs to train the model. So with the Deepin, uh, these companies will be coming not to like these huge providers like Google and Amazon, but they will be using some protocol that will be providing them the GPU of other users. So, do you envision here these providers will be small businesses, like it's say in mining of crypto, or do you envision it's actually end users that are providing, I don't know, their personal computer resources, mobile phone resources, and stuff like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think at the outset, you kind of have to distinguish between those two types of deepins, right? There's something called commodity deepin and then bespoke deepin. I think this is a distinction that the Borderless Capital has made in their thesis. The idea here is, commodity deepin is existing devices that you already have that you may be able to contribute to a network, that, contribute their computational capacity to a network to the extent that it's latent capacity and other people want it, right? And then you have what's called bespoke DeepIn, which is customized devices that are manufactured specifically for that DeepIn network, right? And I think the question you're asking is, which one is likely to prevail? I think when it comes to AI specifically, the hardware really matters, and the hardware is really high grade, frankly, or needs to be useful. So I think the model that we're most likely going to see is one where, like use the example of a mining pool or something, or some kind of organization. I think we're going to see something like that, where your request goes into an organization that has access to GPUs, right? And it has access to GPUs in clusters, like in data centers that are all tied together, for really heavy lifts. But it may also have access to a more decentralized consumer-based network of smaller GPUs that these consumer producers, operators, you in your house, me in my house, have, right, and can contribute to the network, right. So a good example here, just because I'm very familiar with it, is Aether. So Aether is a little bit like like Render, IO.net. They offer these resources, and they have these two lines, right? They have access to data centers. So if you are requiring GPU for training a really heavy lift model, and probably not as heavy obviously as ChatGPT, because that
Hmm.
requires even more, and probably there are very few providers that can actually satisfy that. But short of that, right? You want H100s, which cost $50,000, I think, a piece at least right now. And so you need really high grade compute, and they have to be tied together in data centers. And so Aether has access to those data centers and is able to sell that latent capacity to people who need those resources. But if the task that comes into Aether, right, is a lower level task, right? Maybe if it's simply an inference task, right,
Yeah.
where latency is really important. You want the compute to be as close to the data as possible. They also have access to this Aether Edge network. So Aether Edge is a consumer device. It runs not an H100, because most people don't have $50,000 to spend. It's a Qualcomm chip, but it maintains I think something like 8 virtual machines on it, and it could support inference for a model close to the consumer, close to the data, and is kind of that second model that's a little bit closer, uh, and totally efficient. But as for purely commodity deepen, which is what you mentioned, I think, as well at the beginning, I don't see that working so well for AI. I think it's quite limiting. It just doesn't have the horsepower, and it's too variegated probably to be useful. You really want to focus on quality, I think, when it comes to the compute side for AI devices.
Hmm. And okay, so on the protocol side, like Aether and Render, do you see uh, like good adoption there? Like, are many companies actually considering them over the standard options like Amazon?
I think so. And I know this because NVIDIA cares about these projects, right? On the one hand, you might say, and I don't know if you have this experience when you speak to people outside of Web3, when you start talking about decentralized AI, often they either give you a glazed look or they simply tell you it's a contradiction in terms. What do you mean decentralized AI, right? AI is a centralizing force. It's kind of meant to be clustered, or it works best when it's highly clustered. So your question is totally a valid one, right? Is there any actual demand for this stuff? Um, and I think there is, especially these edge cases. Um, just beginning with kind of the last category, right? Having a device that's low latency, very close to where the inference is being consumed, that is undeniably a niche, right? And it's a niche that a Deepin network is very well structured, I guess, or conceived to meet, because take helium for example. It's kind of similar model. You want these devices to be densely situated, and an AWS or another big provider is unlikely to spend the capital resources. In fact, it can't, to achieve that level of density. And so that crowdsourced model, that bootstrapping model, really works well in filling these gaps in supply. And NVIDIA clearly recognizes this because it's been partnering with some of these edge, GPU compute companies, in recognition of the fact that edge computing is a part of this AI revolution. We have to find ways to render the service as close as possible to the end consumer. And again, Deepin is a really good solution there.
Hmm. And so Aether, do they have their own device you mentioned, right? And
Yes, that's right.
basically, you can buy it and basically kind of use like a mining machine, like
Exactly. It's essentially, you can call it a mining machine.
yeah.
But what it is it's a GPU
Hmm.
unit, right? It is able to, it's optimized for rendering. And so, Aether's original business was gaming, and it was selling its compute resources in the form of data centers, filled with GPUs to gaming companies. So it was rendering games, say cloud-based games. It was rendering them on those GPUs and then streaming them to consumers. And so here again, you have a smaller device called the Aether Edge. It is like a miner in the sense that is doing work, right? It is doing work
And you
that
get
that
paid
that
for that.
and you get paid for that. And you do that with literally a proof of work.
Yeah.
So it has, that's what I love about Deepin. It goes kind of all the way back to Bitcoin and the original logic, right? It's a proof of work system.
Hmm.
These devices have to do the work. They have to prove they've done the work, and then you get a reward in the form of this native currency, to compensate you for the work that your machine has done.
Wow. It's really actually a fascinating idea because, like in Bitcoin, proof of work is guarantee of the like stability of the system, but the work itself, it's kind of um, doesn't make any sense. It doesn't produce anything other than basically securing the system, which is important, but the work itself is kind of it's in vain. But now with Deepin, we actually have this. It's even not. I wouldn't even probably call it proof of work because you are actually doing and providing the work. So you don't need to prove anything. You're just providing that work.
Well, it's not quite so simple. Yes, you are providing the work, but you need to give assurances that the work has been completed at the promised quality and with the promised machine. and the promise specifications. So that's where the proof of work comes in. And my understanding, when I talk to the technical people involved in Deepin, is that this has actually been one of the reasons that we're seeing such a proliferation of Deepin this cycle, is that this off-chain compute, this off-chain verification, and you might say real-world oracle piece, where you are able to verify and prove to the network that in fact you use a certain machine, that it has certain capacity, that in fact it did the necessary work. That piece has really come along significantly and opened up the space to a high variety, right, of Deepin networks. But you're absolutely right. I think Bitcoin is the original network. Now, you're saying that maybe it's kind of rudimentary one. That's probably true. But at the same time, I think if you just define, right, Deepin, at least the general principle as, you're using token incentives to coordinate hardware, right, in order to provide a valuable service. Certainly Bitcoin fits that quite nicely, right? The valuable service here is digital gold, right? You're providing digital gold, and the way you're doing it is by harnessing, the collective resources of a group of people um, through a token incentive, and in that way bootstrapping the supply side of the network, and then delivering that service. And one thing that makes this different from a lot of other business models, including ones in the operator economy, which we can talk about, which is like the Ubers and the Airbnbs and so on. There is a decentralized business model as well that provides a valuable service. But one big difference when we talk about, I think, Deepin is that the operators, they become owners in the business, right? There's this bootstrapping effect where early adopters get an actual equity interest in the business. That's one big difference. And then the other one, of course, is that the intermediary is removed, and so a lot of the rents are redistributed. Um, but it has a long history. Deepin, even though Masari coined the term only 2 years ago in a report, so it kind of obscures, I think, the long and interesting history of this idea.
Yeah, I mean, what I was trying to say about Bitcoin is not that it's outdated, but more that it kind of it made an amazing forecast, kind of. So the proof of work was like useless by itself, but was useful in terms of securing the network. But the actual work produced was not kind of doing anything other than that. But now we actually came to the point where proof of work can actually be proof of actual work that is useful as well. So it's yeah, very interesting to think of it this way. So yeah, you also mentioned like the privacy. So do you see any interesting use cases already popping up in the on the intersection of AI and Web3, which basically make AI more private?
The answer is, aside from self custody, in my opinion, we still have a long ways to go. What we tend to see is solutions like, trusted execution environments, which again, the idea being there that as part of your hardware device, you literally have like a black box, where, all kinds of computation can take place. Nobody can really look inside, and, you maintain the guarantees that you have on the blockchain within that black box. Um, Again, I think we're not quite there yet, but that's something that we are looking at. It's an issue, and this is why I say that perhaps the best solution that we have at the moment is almost like self custody inference, and that's where these edge devices can be useful, right? If you have an Aether Edge, for example, in your home, you have, say, 8 virtual machines on there. You can run inference. You can certainly run inference for other people, but if you are running inference for yourself, especially where that inference is sensitive and the data that's being run over is sensitive, it's a kind of self custody model,
Mm-hmm.
which probably provides the best privacy right now. There are people working on, kind of all manner of solutions, but I would say that is an area right now that is not particularly, you know, even close to being solved. Like, uh, it's a challenge right now. Anytime that you draw on the resources of another person, certainly the centralized provider, but even a decentralized one, to run inference, and you're more you know you're not fully protected as far as what you're giving out in terms of data in PII.
Mm. Um, yeah, actually, you got me excited about this device. Like, how much are they? Do you know?
That's a good question. I actually don't know exactly what they are, but they're in the hundreds of dollars.
Okay, okay.
So you know, and again, you're not getting an H100 here, right? You're getting something that's more modest, it's more consumer scale. It's more part of the long tail here of AIs and AI agents, where you're going to have more fine-tuned, specialized versions of these AIs that can run on more modest rails, more modest infrastructure.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, it would be interesting to use it specifically for inference because right now I'm almost not using inference on my computer because I mean, though I have the latest MacBook, it's still like, I mean, it's slowing everything down.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And that's the thing. There are some rumblings, and I don't know if this will actually take place. It'd be interesting to know, but it's a very secretive company. Apple, I've heard that Apple is considering like a whole suite, right, of new devices that are specifically optimized for inference and AIs. People were underwhelmed by the announcement they made, I guess this week, right?
Yeah.
It looked like catch up, but I think we are going to need a whole new kind of set of devices here, and some of these Deepin hardware units have a role to play, but they may well soon face competition as well from the big players. If we're going to unleash a whole new sales cycle for AI optimized inference, and then potentially more modest fine tuning training that you can do as a consumer.
Yeah, they will. I was speaking to Amazon, and basically they're like super excited about AI, which is kind of counterintuitive. Oh, not AI, I mean about Deepin, and which is kind of counterintuitive because it's kind of potentially their competitor in the long run. So they're kind of trying to take over that trend, I guess.
Well, I mean, they have it. I think they have more of an interest, right? In the sense that they're not totally shut out because they're going to sell the devices, right? They're in a position where they could, um, first of all, know which devices are being sold at scale for Deepin because they control the marketplace. Then they can, of course, make their own devices that are cheaper and try to take that market. So, yeah, it's not the same as maybe Apple or somebody like that being excited about Deepin. Amazon gets to sell Deepin, and we're seeing uh, more, I would say, these deepen networks look to generic devices like the kind that you can get off Amazon to supply, the like IoT devices and so on, or sensors that are pretty garden variety. You can buy them directly off Amazon, and then begin, passively earning rewards by, sharing your home data, with some buyer of data, and potentially on that side, there's an AI element too. That this is data that's being collected to be fed into an AI, right? So there is definitely that lean towards Amazon, generic devices. So there's good reason for Amazon to be excited. Um, I guess we'll see what the quality ultimately is of those depends and whether that data is very useful. But it certainly lowers the barrier to entry, right? If you're a deep project, you don't want uh, to price entry into your Deepin network too high, and if you know you and I can enter this data provision space by buying a cheap Amazon device, then it's kind of great for the network. They acquire us at low cost.
Mm. So it seems like from what you are saying, like obviously Deepin and decentralized AI is a very exciting mm, niche, but it's kind of still not there yet. I mean, there is a lot of hype, obviously, but there are not so many actual projects. So considering that, uh, there are still a lot of projects, and I would believe that a lot of them are kind of going in the wrong direction. So in your experiences, you're basically a fund, you're talking to a lot of projects. What do you see are the main kind of mistakes the founders who try to get into this intersection of AI and Web3 are making?
Yeah, no, glad to get into that, I guess. But just as a big picture, I do think there are more and more projects, right? There are more and more entrants, the deep in space included. As investors, what we try to do is pick the right category. First of all, very important, the right category in terms of what's promising, and then to de-risk within that category, right? So picking the wrong project in the right category is as bad as picking the wrong category. Just like being too early is as bad as being wrong. So um, in terms of what founders do wrong or what projects are doing wrong, in my opinion, specifically where we're focused, right? And as I've explained, we're focused really on the deep inside. We think that's one way to de-risk this big category is to rest on assumptions that we think are rock solid. Like, there aren't enough GPUs. There's some latent GPU supply. There's a need for edge compute, right? And so, this subcategory is one that has promise, right? So we pick the category, and then we start to de-risk within that category. How do we make sure that we're picking the right projects? And that's where I guess mistakes come in, or unnecessary risks come in. And so what I look for quite a lot, aside from the usual things, which are, of course, the team, the strength of the team, strength of the tech, and so forth, is really the demand side, right? So here, we're specifically talking about provisioning compute resources to somebody who wants to buy them, because in a hype cycle in crypto, as you know, it's very easy to create a Ponzi, self, a circular kind of scheme where you're rewarding all kinds of people for doing something, whether it be using your product or providing supply towards some service, and everybody, is happy because the token price is going up. But ultimately, you don't have true product market fit. You have this proxy, which is you're paying people in a kind of Ponzi-esque way to use the ecosystem. So we try to identify those projects, or try to avoid getting involved there, because we want to see at least a road towards demand and sustainability for the project.
And this demand
And
shouldn't be immediate. It can be like somewhere in like, I don't know, in a few years, right?
it can be in a few years, absolutely. But it helps if um, you're dealing with a team that's already in the industry and has some understanding. I would say for deep end projects, um, you know, the best type of founding team is probably one that's already running a Web2 business
Hmm.
in the same industry. So a great example, again, is the GPU provisioning. If you're running data centers now, right, and you are servicing existing customers, you understand the industry, you understand what they need in terms of quality, right? Um, and then what you're doing that will be attractive to an investor is extending a deep in network from that kind of beachhead that you have in Web 2, which allows you to attract more supply of GPUs, but also create a way for new customers to permissionlessly, plug into that latent supply, right? So to us, that looks fairly de-risked. And again, I think Aether is a really good example of that. They are moving into Deepin gradually, from a kind of more centralized business to then selling the latent GPU capacity within that more centralized business, using a permissionless network, and then branching out even further into this consumer based Deepin with devices that the people consumers buy and keep in their homes and use to use for themselves, but also sell to other buyers. And with that device specifically, there is some demand. There's a project called iPhone, which is a Web3 portal, which uses these Aether Edge consumer GPU units to render the DApp, which is something like a Web3 virtual phone, like the Saga phone, but it's rendered again on these Deepin GPUs, and it's streamed to local devices, potentially very low grade devices in all parts of the world.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting. And so I'm curious, the teams, the startups that come to you like over the years, do you see any trend in um, kind of shrinking the teams? Because like what I see is a big trend in AI is basically solopreneurship. Is uh, what a team of 10 developers could develop, like say 2 years ago, in a year. Now it's like one developer in 1 month. So I'm curious, like in your experience and your fund's experience, do you see that kind of shrinking of the teams or not yet?
I mean, it's very interesting that you're seeing it. I don't know that we're quite seeing that, but it's certainly to be expected, right? If you take this AI, moment seriously, I personally fully expect that developers, engineers, are going to be, certainly made less, you know, necessary, or are going to be, at least to a degree, replaced, right, by AIs, and that's arguably starting to happen. We're not really seeing it, I would say, yet, but I'm fully expecting that to happen. And as an investor, you're kind of thinking, to the extreme. If you play out this logic, where do we end up?
Exactly.
And maybe I'm preempting the more philosophical part of the conversation here, but there's something called an agentic protocol, right?
Hmm.
Which is kind of the notion that you're going to have um, maybe a corporate structure, or a form of organization that's going to be largely synthetic, right? Populated primarily with agents, who are going to
Agentic
be
DAO.
running the best agentic DAO, exactly. Yes, agentic DAO. And DAOs are, I think, great for agents for another set of reasons that we can go into. But I would expect to start seeing that in maybe the deal flow. I would say not quite yet. We're not seeing it. But if this indeed holds true, it means a disruption, not just to startups, but arguably to venture funds too. What happens to the venture model? What happens to the DAO model? What happens to the corporate model? And when do we see a two-person unicorn company, right? So that is maybe more in the realm of science fiction at the moment, but it is arguably the road that we're on.
Yeah, so that two-person unicorn, what was it? Sam Altman who kind of came up with this idea. And yeah, I understand that maybe in your work you are not seeing that because, like Deepin, for example, it's pretty complex thing. You need hardware people, you need software people, but like where I see it a lot is pure SaaS products. Right now, like one developer, 1 month can build something like a year or like 2 years ago, a team of like super experienced developers would take them maybe half a year or a year to deliver. And plus, like, not only developers, basically right now these solopreneurs, they can do like everything from like coming up with idea, research, developing the whole solution, and marketing it.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. But I think we're still kind of in the co-pilot era, right? Where we're
For
sort of
sure, for sure.
at the start of this, where we're kind of acquiring superpowers, or enlarging our own powers with a level of automation. But arguably you ain't seen nothing yet, right? As far as what these um, agents are going to be able to do as they become more sophisticated and truly more agentic in the sense of being able to do things. So when we look at agents, for example, from an investment standpoint, and there are a number of projects now that offer agent building and agent marketplace type platforms. That's what we look at. How agentic are they, right? You want to pick those projects that are able to deliver agents with minimal amount of fine tuning or refinement on the customer side, and then agents that are as autonomous as possible in the sense that they're actually able to do things. That's what we're being promised, that you're going to be able to communicate your intent to an agent, and then that agent's going to be able to carry out the work. So that intent layer and the way the agent is actually connected to some rails. When we say these are crypto rails, naturally digital native, payment rails, for example. To the extent that the agents are able to do that, is really a measure, I think, for us of how useful and promising like an agent project is for investment.
What are some cool projects, like specifically in agentic space, like you've seen lately? What are you excited about?
Yeah, so there's one called Hyletic, that we really like, and it really has to do with what I just said, right? That they seem to have superior agents that are kind of off the shelf. Specifically, the use cases that are very popular now, which are kind of chatbot, service agent, that you can just take one and integrate it quite easily, and there's very little you have to do. It's quite effective. And then we also think that they're well positioned to connect these agents to actual infrastructure, allowing them to do more things, to actually be out there, fulfilling goals on behalf of their principals. But there is definitely a lot out there, right? And I think one of the challenges for an investor is to pick those agent, you know, um, uh, attempts at agents that are not really vulnerable to annihilation, if you will, by the big players. So, we think of it as like there will be a long tail for these agents and for what they're able to do. You probably want to pick those projects that OpenAI and the other centralized players are not going to go after for whatever reason. So there might be things like payments. It could also be agents that are for more mature audiences, right? What are they going to leave alone for the longest time? Because we've seen now, I think, I'm sure you have the sense too. It's a kind of a series of red weddings. Where Open AI will invite the industry's top projects, or top companies to a conference, and then proceed to announce a range of innovation and products that have now annihilated those companies, and a kind of savage
Yeah,
murder
every
of,
three
of a
six months.
cohort of innovation. Yeah, exactly. Every 6 months this happens. A red wedding, just like Game of Thrones. So you try to avoid going up against OpenAI to the extent that you can.
Yeah, and I think one of the ways to do so is to look for kind of the cases that are too small for them. uh, let's say, for example, like I worked a lot with the like AI in real estate. So uh, OpenAI would, I don't think they will ever go to training their model on specifically data sets of um, sales conversations between real estate agents and the buyers, because first these data sets are difficult to get and it's pretty small use case for them. So one of the ways to kind of secure yourself is to have fine-tuned models on very unique data sets that are not public.
Yeah, exactly. So that's what I mean by the long tail, right, of AI. That OpenAI may stay away from certain of those verticals, um, and to the extent that you want to get into decentralized AI. Yeah, I think even this area can be quite interesting from a decentralization perspective. Um, so um, I don't know. I'm sure you're familiar with the notion of data DAOs, right? Um, when you're talking about specialized high quality data, there's a role there to be played, I think, by crypto. And in general, I would say the property of crypto that it's really coming to the fore as far as AI goes, and it's kind of to decentralized and to decentralize AI, it tends to be this kind of coordinating property, right? That you can kind of marshal a group of people to do a certain thing, right? Whether that thing be contributing a resource like compute and devices or something else, and that something else can be data, right? And I think with these bespoke AIs, you could see that maybe in that area you're going to have more decentralized, um, high quality data being provisioned by groups of people that are in a very specific field, or they have like very specific, um, the data and activity that AI will ingest, right? So maybe we'll see that, but that is certainly the way that we think about it, as you said. There's going to be a long tail of these more finely tuned, customized AIs, and you better pick carefully if you're working on those now, to ensure that you're not treading on those that the big players kind of want to keep for themselves.
Yeah, for sure. It's actually one of the mistakes I see startups in the AI space are doing last 2 years over and over again. They basically create a product that is merely a wrapper around a base model with some prompt engineering on top, and these companies, they die in hundreds of thousands every 3 to 6 months on every update of OpenAI or a new model being released. So
Yeah, yeah. It can't be just a wrapper, right? It can't. It has to be more than that. And so um, I think it's at that point it's about data customization. Um, maybe incentivizing people to provide the data that's going to set your model apart from the kind of the baseline generalized model.
yeah, and going one step back, so you mentioned agentic or copilot approach. So I frankly don't see pure agents as a something that is kind of meaningful before we have the AGI, because for example right now, what I mentioned, that solopreneurs, one man company, obviously it's not like a person that clicks a button and they have everything, a product, marketing and stuff like that. They just know how to use these tools to uh, gain this all superpowers. Basically they don't know anything about marketing, but they can do it with good prompt engineering skills and the models. They are maybe a backend developer and they don't know much about the front end developer, but ChatGPT or other tools can help them quickly get on track with that and maybe write part of that code. but it's all in Copilot. And what I caught myself, like a thought that I caught myself on, is basically right now everything that in like few years will be fully productized, it's already possible. Like basically we can already build full um, AI employees, like marketing or developers or stuff like that. But it's actually it's all these bespoke solutions where, like, I, as an AI app engineer, I need to kind of do a lot of work to build such employee. But like in a few years, we'll basically have them as productized versions of these employees. But I don't think it means that they will be fully autonomous. It will still be Copilot. It will be much more elaborate and much more efficient Copilot. But it's like with a real employee. If you consider it, you can consider it as an autonomous agent or as a copilot, because it helps you as a, say, founder, or as CEO, to do the job. So is this person a copilot, or is he an agent? I mean, I think it's more a terminology, because like it's both.
Well, I mean, it's definitely a spectrum, right? And agent, even the word agent, we don't do a very good job in crypto, especially of defining our terms. I would say, what do we mean by agent? Agent has even a legal meaning. Who's responsible? An agent is acting on behalf of the principal, and so
Hmm.
the principal is responsible for everything the agent does. But I think, on a technical level, I agree with you. It's a spectrum, right? You kind of have more, what you might call like automated, co-pilots, where they're executing things, or they're helping you put things together, but they are not autonomous. You may have sort of beginning at automation, kind of, more primitive automation, then you kind of get into this level of autonomy, and autonomy, I think, is truly a more sophisticated, agent, in the true sense of the word, meaning, forming its own intentions, ingesting something from the outside world, having some kind of internal process of deliberation and decision making, and then executing on that with minimal kind of human intervention, aside from like kind of a broad goal being set. Um, and I also agree with you that we probably will not get there for some time, but that is the direction that we're going in. And again, speculate maybe a little bit because it's fun. If you play that out, somebody said to me, at the consensus conference that I was at, last month, in the future, this person said, people will hire humans, for jobs based more on the agents that they bring with them, or at least in large part based on the agents that those
Interesting.
employees bring with them to the job, as
Interesting.
based on the human skills, right, that individual possesses. I think that's a very interesting thought, to just think about how we might see a disruption in the labor market, that you're going to be, each person will have a set of agents, I guess, employees, right? And likely in a freelancer economy, will move from job to job. And each of those, agents will have, resume of all the things they've done and what they're capable of. And you as an employer are going to look at those resumes and say, oh, these are well, vetted, well trained,
Team.
agents, and the human seems pretty good too. So take the human. So you take the human with 20 agents, and that's the deal in terms of the engagement. So
So it's
we'll see. But I
kind of
don't count that out. Yeah,
one person team, which is kind of actually 100 people.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And then the question sort of becomes, what are the skills you're looking for in the human, and what are the metrics by which you assess the agents that come along with the human. But it becomes this kind of package deal where you're looking at, um, you know, the agents as much as you're looking at the human, like we do today.
Yeah, thinking of this, so basically, yeah, in that future, I come, say, to a company and say I have that team of, I don't know, 100 agents. So basically, if we compare it to the current situation, it's like I am taking the job of these 100 people. So where are these 100 people going like to work in? Like, and I think it's a big anxiety of a lot of people. So about losing the job, and it's I think a pretty real threat. Have you thought of
Yeah,
like maybe of types of new jobs that will be created on kind of this burnt field of like old jobs?
yeah. I mean, that's definitely going to happen. And I don't think that the tech industry does itself any favors by sugarcoating that. I think the displacement in the job market over time will be significant, right? And unlike any other disruption, in recent memory, it's going to, um, really remake um, the job market and cause quite a bit of, I think, hardship. Um, and it's going to cause us, I think, as you know, countries and as citizens to really have to take notions like UBI seriously, because it's not clear that necessarily we'll be able to create enough new jobs like you're suggesting that are going to keep those people who have been displaced busy. Um, I that said, you are going to have new jobs, right? You kind of have to think forward and ask, okay, in an age where a lot of the, and this we were talking about when we right before the podcast, that AIs, at least as they exist now, they seem to be very good at eliminating kind of lower level work, right? The
Hmm.
execution work, kind of the grunt work, especially where it requires the digestion of a lot of material, summary of material, the creation of new written material. They're just very, very good with language. Um, and, my background before going to venture, as I mentioned, was law. And law firms, especially big law firms, the vast majority of the people there are very bright young graduates from top Ivy League schools who are essentially doing a lot of research, and analysis, and then writing for higher up strategic thinkers. So I think the new jobs that are going to be created are going to be on that level, you know, uh, kind of strategic thinkers, people who are able to deploy AIs. They're able to use I guess natural language increasingly,
Hmm.
prompt engineers, um, to aim the AIs in a certain direction, and maybe to curate, the right group of AIs to accomplish certain tasks. Um, are there going to be enough such jobs? I don't know, right? Possibly, possibly not. And I think we're definitely going to see some kind of return to what you might call like purely human endeavors, and you might see a lot of people maybe go into realms like spirituality, art, human connection, the kind of the preserve of what is truly human in a synthetic world. I think is going to attract a lot of humans, and even a lot of interest and a lot of demand from other humans. I think that's going to become very important to us as a lot of the kind of utilitarian problems of life become solved by synthetic beings.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned art. That kind of reminded me of another episode of HMs I was recording yesterday with Patrick from Vanek. And he said that probably, I mean, his idea is that once we have all that free time and we don't have to do utilitarian tasks, we still, I mean, as humans, we're kind of striving to do something. And he said that probably new religions will be invented for us to kind
Yeah,
of
I think that's yeah. For us to find higher levels of spirituality, there's no doubt. The question is, you know are those religions going to involve AIs in some way, right? And this is something we also kind of discussed a little bit earlier, right? The idea that the way we talk about AI is we kind of juxtapose it to the human, and sort of the answer I just gave also does that. Says, okay, we're going to find some enclave, some core where the human can flourish, and maybe the AI plays some kind of supporting role, but in any event, is kind of kept outside of that purely human domain. But then there's kind of another view, right? The view that we discussed, which is the Ray Kurzweil singularity view, which is that this is an evolutionary process, and you're going to move from a purely kind of organic form of the human into a more synthetic form of the human. And it's not an oppositional relationship, that this is kind of, we are going to become, at least in part, artificial, synthetic, and I guess bond to those AIs. And I think when you talk about things like religion, um, it's, I think, a little bit easier to see how that might happen actually in a realm like that. I don't know if there are new religions that we would want necessarily to keep AIs totally separate from that. AIs may actually be very well positioned to have a role in those religions, as
Mm.
oracles, or
You know what?
productive, contributors to those religions.
Yeah, actually, you sparked an interesting idea in my mind. So maybe new religion can become that missing link between what we're. I think we were discussing this before we started the streaming. So the idea that though AI is kind of our evolution, it's us, but just in another form. It's still psychologically we don't feel it like us, and we feel it as another species. So maybe religion, this new religion, can become that mental link for us to kind of be more calm and more like to have less anxiety uh, about that kind of mental disconnect, and feel that we actually that's us, just in another form.
It could be, right. We do need a reorientation in terms of our paradigm, I think. When it comes to intelligence is just a different kind of thing. And it's, I think one mistake that we can make just from a purely technical side is to think of it as just another disruption, right? We disrupt things so casually, and we have been, again, since the advent of the internet. We move fast, break things, disrupt, everything's great. But I think intelligence is different in kind, and we should be much more careful, and it has much deeper societal implications. Um, and part of that, as you were just saying, is to figure out how that bridge is going to work. What is the relationship going to be exactly to the synthetic? Is it something that we welcome? Is it something that's mediated, by religion, by other institutions? How do we welcome the synthetic? How does the synthetic, welcome us in a coexistence? And these are very much the anxieties, that are playing out today. Um, Initially when all this was starting, and we began this episode with sort of the magical moment of ChatGPT. Um, it was a moment of magic, but in a maybe slightly a moment of recognition as well, right? When you're interacting with ChatGPT, and I think that moment of recognition is something that's gonna stay with us and expand over time. That we are actually going to see ourselves in these machines much more than we may even be comfortable with. Um, Something that's surprised me that's already happening is how willing people are to use these therapy bots, right? To really disclose, a lot about themselves, and to have long sessions, with you know, computer programs. When I would have guessed before this happened, I would have guessed that um, that's an arena where actually having a human in front of you really matters. But apparently it doesn't. So um, I think we're going to go kind of deeper into that space, and we're going to maybe lose clarity exactly on where the human ends and the synthetic begins, I guess is the way I put it.
Hmm. Uh, we have a comment from the audience, but it's, I think, uh, it's another long story. So I know you're limited in time. Last question I ask all of my guests: two AI tools you use on a daily basis, and you can recommend others to use.
Uh, one tool that I actually use, and it was created by a friend of mine, is an AI agent answering system, like a voicemail system,
Hmm.
which is incredibly satisfying because we always see so much spam these days. Uh, when a telemarketer calls, my AI agent, I won't pick up, and my AI agent will pick up and totally reverse the tables on the spam caller, start asking them questions, basically wasting their time. So that's something I quite enjoy using, and I think that that's a very obvious use case for AI, having an AI kind of you know um, take your calls and summarize messages for people calling in. And then I think, like everybody else, AI has totally changed the way that I write. I no longer write from scratch. I just don't. I'll ask some AI. We have a one that we use within a DAO that I'm a part of, um, to just create, off of an outline, create a first draft, and then I'll start working from there. So those are two tools that I use, if not every day, certainly on a weekly or biweekly basis, especially when I'm writing.
Okay, looks like we had some connection issue, but good it happened
We're back. We're
right
back.
at the very end. So, yeah, Ivo, thank you very much. Really enjoyed talking to you, and hope we'll have another round sometime in the future. Yeah, thank you very
Absolutely,
much.
Tony. Thank you so much for having me, and thanks for having this podcast and diving into all the issues and thinking about the future. That's what we need right now. I think we have to kind of chase down a lot of these ideas and to do it together as early as possible, so that we don't find ourselves in a place that's less than ideal for us humans.
Yeah, let's continue witnessing that future and participating in that. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Until next time.